You're listening to a Melinah Entertainment original podcast. On this week's episode of the Ably Diverse Chronicles, I have the absolute pleasure of chatting to Oliver Morton-Evans. They are ably diverse disability advocate who are very passionate about human rights and sexuality, so why not join us right now? Hey Oliver, welcome to the show. Such a pleasure to have you.
I'm doing really well, thank you, Melinah. I'm really happy to be on your show.
You yourself are ably diverse. Could you tell me a little bit more about yourself? And is that the term that you would use?
First of all, I have cerebral palsy, so I was born 2 months premature, and I actually died twice when I was born. So that resulted in cerebral palsy. I get around in a wheelchair, and I have quite a bit of difficulty with motor function, but luckily that hasn't affected my ability to pretty much do everything that I've wanted to do in my life. So when I was growing up, disability wasn't really something that was talked about a great deal. So for me, whether I'm called a person with a disability or a disabled person, I don't think it really matters to me anymore. I think there's always been an opinion around putting the person first. So person with a disability. However, I've kind of changed my mind a little bit around that. So I definitely feel that I'm happy with both.
You achieved so much in your lifetime. How was that getting to your first achievement? Did you feel like you had to kind of prove yourself a lot more than what you thought? And by that I mean for people to be able to see you for you and beyond your disability.
Growing up in the 80s and 90s, the world was largely ableist. So any diagnosis or prognosis from the medical profession was largely doom and gloom. To be honest, very grateful for parents that refused to accept that, and really not until I started not achieving certain developmental milestones that they could understand my disability. But it was really down to my parents who refused to accept the idea that I would be not able to achieve what I've been able to achieve, and obviously go to mainstream schooling, go to live independently, and be able to have a successful career. It was really very hard for my parents, because my parents really had to not take that on board when society around them was telling them that I basically needed to be wrapped up in cotton wool. Just with regard to what you were saying about having to prove myself, I believe, unfortunately, living in a disabled body, really any time, unfortunately, we are often required to prove ourselves, and it's really unfortunate that is the way it is. But I feel like, I feel like I've never really had to stop doing that in a lot of ways. Just the way society is not set up for people with disabilities, and obviously all of the misconceptions and judgments people have around difference, and particularly disability difference, and also because we have cerebral palsy, so it is obviously brain damage, and it's easy for people to associate that with a loss of mental function rather than purely being physical. So I feel like I'm dispelling myths all the time.
I totally agree with you that our parents, and it sounds like the same for you, parents just had to fight for us to be in mainstream, and that's really, really tough. And I take my hat off to each and every parent that's ever done that, because I know a lot of parents do find that so incredibly difficult, and they crumble. As you were saying with CP as well, it is just a world of unknown, isn't it? It's a world of not uncertainty, but this might happen, that might happen. You never really know. So you take the cards that you dealt with and you deal with them as best you can, as even a parent or the person with CP. And as you've rightly said, a lot of people mistake CP for a developmental disability as well as physical. So people have this disability etiquette thing of squatting down to your level. I'm sure you've had that a lot, and that's a crack up. But in some aspects it is appropriate, but it's really hard to know where that line is. You mentioned you were living independently, which is awesome. Has that been a journey for you?
Most definitely, it's been a journey. I've lived on my own in my own apartment for about 7 years now. However, I did live in like a independent setup in my parents' home for the previous, I don't know, 20 or so years. So I've been instilled, luckily, with a great sense of independence and how important that is for me. So it's definitely been a journey. I think the hardest part was to actually really convince my parents that I was capable of living on my own and just receive the support that I needed through, people coming in every day, a couple of times a day to help me. And I also feel that was made 100 times easier when the NDIS came in, and it was just by sheer luck, I guess, that was about a year after I moved into my own apartment. So that just made things so much easier. And, with regard to who I was able to employ, and I'm really lucky now that I have an awesome support team that's basically come from my friendship circles. So it just makes things so much easier. I think back in the late 90s, it was always thought that I would need to go and live, like in a group home or something like that, and that just filled me with dread.
Living in support of the common is a dreaded option for most people who have a pure physical disability. And have you found that that's also impacted positively on your career because you felt better in your personal life, being able to live where you want to live?
Most definitely, it's helped with my career, but it has also helped with pretty much every aspect of my life. Be able to have my own space where I can, be the master of my own domain, essentially, has helped me really in all aspects. Be able to, come and go as I please, and to really have that level of independence that I know that a lot of people in my situation don't get to have to form the connections and relationships and friendships and everything that I've always wanted to have. So I would put that down to be able to live independently. Definitely. I think it's very important to try and instill a sense of independence in people with disabilities. Often they don't get that opportunity, so I would really implore that, and just really obviously not everyone can have the level of independence that I do, but there are ways in which you can instill that sense in people so that they can feel a bit more, I don't know, I would say, self-actualized. And, I think we might end up talking a little bit about, sexuality and relationships later, but that's often really hard to do in a shared accommodation setting. So, I think it's really important for people with disabilities to really feel like they have their own space, just like, any able-bodied person would. I think I would also add there that because of the way that I was brought up, in mainstream schooling, and just the way that I was really, really invited to socialize in my early teens, I often felt like I didn't have a lot in common with the disabled community, and particularly, obviously, cerebral palsy, other people with cerebral palsy. I felt like we didn't have a great deal of common ground often, so I would gravitate more towards able-bodied friends. I think in my later years, I realized that there's a lot of solidarity to be had by finding other people with disabilities to be friends with, that have a shared experience. It's very important to find people, with a very shared experience, because it can get quite lonely otherwise.
I agree with you. Having that sense of autonomy when most of your privacy is taken away is fucking crucial, and it really is, not for your physical health, but more importantly for your mental health. It's really interesting to hear that you were gravitating towards more able-bodied people and people with disabilities, and I was the same. When I was a kid, I didn't know anything other than able-bodied people. That's how I thought, and that's how I still think, even though I've come to terms with my disability now. I took every avenue to avoid it when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's really really great to hear. We have a bit of a shared history about the not really gravitating towards other people with cerebral palsy due to not feeling like we have a shared experience. Really, really, really interesting to hear that. And I mean, I've contemplated that for quite a number of years, and I believe that that has somehow created a little bit of internalized ableism in me, which for years was quite an issue, and I really needed to work on that to be able to progress forward. So I feel like I'm now coming out the other side of that, but I feel that that kind of internalized ableism often manifested because, of the fact that I didn't really feel in solidarity with other people with cerebral palsy.
I felt the same as you, as in the sense of isolation and that I didn't really belong, because even though I was a person with a disability, I didn't see myself that way, so therefore I didn't fit in the disabled category, but then I also didn't fit in the, able-bodied category. So where do you go from that? All we know is mainstream. We've got severe intelligence. So where do you go from that?
So I think in order to feel more confident in the world in general, I think it's really important to have a good relationship with your sexuality. So that's where I'm coming from, and I really want to help not only educate the masses, but also to lift up the disabled community who may struggle with that. Like to be honest, like I did, and it was a journey for me, and I know how liberating it has been to come through that journey. So obviously it's really important for me to help other people with the same issues, to lift them up as well.
I totally agree with you. The awareness of sexuality when it comes to disability is crucial, not only for the person living with the disability, but also the people supporting them, because quite often we get quite sheltered and taught that, sex is a bad thing because we can't typically get ourselves out of situations, or that's what we're told. And what happens if something happens, then the support worker has to deal with that, or the family has to deal with that. So there's a lot of stigma surrounding that whole subject, and I think in the work that you do, that'll help break those barriers. And I know I was visiting a supported accom once, and two of the residents were actually dating. So one was dating the other, and they were separated because the company that were running that supported accom found upon the whole relationship. No one does it, no one talks about it. So it is a whole stigmatic conversation that needs to be broken down, and hopefully the work that you do will help just crack the ice on that one. But we need to know, and as disabled human beings, if you like, that conversation and those feelings are okay, and they should not be frowned upon. If you are able to positively make those decisions, then you shouldn't be. I think we're often seen as our disability rather than an actual human being. So why would a person, for instance, in a wheelchair even consider a sexual relationship with somebody? Because to the naked eye, that doesn't look like it's possible. So then that stigma is created. It's just, it's a lot. For people need to be educated more and, open to more ideas, and that they can go home and get their brains fucked out by their partner and no one talks about it. It's a very interesting conversation I have, and barriers need to be broken. Breaking down those conversations again creates that autonomy that is a basic human right, regardless of disability or not. So I think it's a really crucial thing that you're wanting to do, regardless of gender also.
A few years ago, I did go and see a therapist because I I was really struggling with dating, and I'm sure you've got stories as well, but online dating doesn't really work very well for people with physical disabilities. It's very, very much about how you look on the outside. So anyway, I struggled a lot with dating, so I went to see a therapist. And, the therapist wanted to give me a task of finding interabled, because I was essentially looking for someone that was probably a little bit more able than me, just because I am a sexual person, so I did want to be able to have that kind of experience without necessarily a support worker being involved. So, so the therapist told me to go out and find some interabled couples on social media to basically model from. And I was doing a lot of research back, this was 4 or 5 years ago. And really, the thing that struck out to me the most was there wasn't any representation in Australia. There were quite a few interabled couples I could find overseas, but really nothing in Australia. And I think even to a day, I can probably count on one hand the number of interabled relationships that are potentially high profile. And therefore, I really think, that the attitudes in Australia are quite backwards, or just they haven't caught up to the progressiveness of the rest of the world. That's something else I think is really, really needing to change.
I agree that the representation of interabled couples aren't there, and so therefore it is difficult to know how to navigate that and how to represent yourself. That could lead us on to another episode, so I'd love to continue this conversation on another episode, because I think we could go on for hours. And the crucial thing that people need to know about, and it sort of opened people's minds about what we struggle with particularly, but not only just CP, but other disabilities as well, that they struggle, just as much as we do. So, thank you for this conversation. It's been awesome. And I'd love to have you back on the show to continue it, because like I said, it is deeply, deeply crucial. So thank you for your time. I've really appreciated it. And we'll talk further about you coming back on at a later date.
Well, thanks for having me, Melinah. It's been an awesome conversation. I've really, really enjoyed getting to know you a bit more. And it's fantastic what you're doing with the podcast. I think this conversation definitely needs to be had more in Australia, and it's great that you put your hand up to do this, and I would be more than happy to come back on to talk more. I think we could probably talk for hours. This conversation has been wonderful, and I'd love to continue the conversation. I think we have a lot of shared views and values and experiences, and I'd love to keep the conversation going. I'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, and remember to connect with us on our socials and our Patreon. We'd love to hear from you, and also with your feedback and ideas. Join us next time on the Ably Chronicles.